Okay, this is Tom again. Thanks for coming back. And today we are going to be talking about sea turtle swimming, which this turtle is doing right behind me here. And we're going to talk about their anatomy, and then we're going to get into the senses. Okay, so I think I'm going to start here. This is lesson 2. We're going to talk about sea turtle swimming, their anatomy, and senses. Okay, so as you can see, the sea turtle uses its front flippers for swimming, kind of like wings of a bird, up and down. And it just uses its hind flippers for steering. Now, if they drop one of their hind flippers, you can see here, to a left flipper, then they'll turn to the left. So it's just like a rudder on a boat. They're just using them for steering. And they have to breathe air, even though they're reptiles, but they breathe air. They've got lungs like mammals. But when they're swimming, every propulsion downward that actually pushes them forward. And that's because of the dynamics of their shell. That when they push forward, it basically just by going flippers up and down, they can get moving forward. Okay, so this is how they swim. Pretty amazing. Okay, a little bit of the anatomy that we're talking about here is they have this outer shell, and this is actually a green sea turtle. And remember, green sea turtles aren't called green sea turtles because of the color of the shell, but because they feed on grasses and algae, things like that. This outer shell, they have all these fancy names, but they call it a carapace. And then you can see these big scales that they have that grow with the outer shell or carapace that are called scutes right there. And you can see more typical scales on their flippers and on the hind flipper there. They actually use their flippers for swimming up and down, and then just the hind flippers are used for steering. But the female needs her hind flippers for digging her nest, which we're going to be talking about in the next lesson. And also, this happens to be a female. Females have short tails where a male would have a very long tail. And this is very helpful to scientists because we can identify in the field if it's female or male. However, pretty much finding a male on the beach is really rare unless it's sick. And because once a male is born and goes in as a little hatchling out into the ocean, it never comes back on land. It's out there forever. And maybe this is how they survived the dinosaurs. Okay, so there is a shell. I'll show you. The vertebrae is actually fused to the upper shell, the carapace. And then they also have kind of a belly shell, which they call plastron. Okay. All right, so that's the anatomy, and we'll talk more about that, showing you some models of real turtles. But a couple sensory capabilities I want to tell you about. Underneath this scute right here, they have a little gland called a pineal gland, and I think we talked about that with Tort a little bit. They're very sensitive to light. We have one between our eyes, but we're right about here, but we've lost use of it because we've got electricity and things like that. But turtles are very aware of it. In fact, usually what happens in the fall, when we fall back an hour in time, they don't need a watch. That stimulates them to go either usually to their breeding grounds. And then in spring, when we spring ahead an hour, then they migrate to our feeding grounds. Okay, they have big eyes, and big eyes are very helpful in collecting a lot of light. So the big eyes allow them, they're adapted to see in dark environments, but they're also maybe adapted to see the stars for navigating, which we'll talk about some more in a little bit. And let me go back, sorry. So another thing I want to mention is that in the front part of their head and in the leading edges of their flippers, they have iron material ferrous oxide, and it's actually magnetite. And magnetite is found in rocks and things like that, but we actually find it in our turtles, in the leading edges of their flipper and in the forehead of the brain. Whales, dolphins have this. We'll talk more about that in migrations coming up. But it's very important. It's like having an internal compass. They're sensing and feeling magnetic lines and being able to travel and navigate that way. Okay, just a couple of those. Okay, so this is a big leatherback sea turtle. And yes, as you can see, they do not have a hard shell. It's just a leathery skin, but these kind of spines on the back help them hydrodynamically go through the water, okay? And they also use smell is one of their key things. When they travel and migrate long distances across the ocean, a lot of times if they get close enough to an island, they'll actually smell for the island. So a lot of times smell is also another helpful navigational trait to have when you're going, and sea turtles have good sense of smell. So I'm gonna show you the taxidermy turtles. Hello, we're at the taxonomy table. We're gonna be learning more about the shells, and I wanted to show you some real turtles, however, they're not alive. This is what they call a taxidermy, what you see in museums. They actually take all the smelly stuff out, they shined up the shell, and those aren't real eyeballs, those are marbles there. And this is a big green sea turtle. And then we can use them for museum specimens, things like that. But one of the things I want to show you is that this sea turtle is about 50 years old, we estimate. They have a long lifespan, up to 100 years old. And just look, they have large eyes that we talked about, and right in front is their nose, the smell, the two holes there is the nose. And they have these long flippers right here, the flippers. And it's interesting that they have a little nail right here on the flipper. And then they have their hind flippers that, again, aren't used for swimming. They're just used for steering. And we'll talk more about that with a hawksbill. I have another turtle I want to show you. But this is a beautiful turtle, and we're going to talk about things that humans are doing to sell these turtles in public fairs and things like that. But we can't be doing that. So this is a green sea turtle, and she is a female, very short tail. The males would have a long tail. And then all of this is keratin is made of them. And they don't have teeth, but right here would be, there's a keratin built up that almost creates shearing teeth. And we'll talk more about that with the skulls later in the other sections. Okay, so let me get the hawksbill out here. This is a younger turtle, but still, she is an adult. And beautiful markings on that shell. And she is a female, very short tail. And you can see typical scales here. And then this is called the carapace, right? And this is where they have the larger scales that kind of make up the carapace, and they're called scutes. So when they're swimming, they actually just go up and down with their with their front flippers, and then with their back flippers, they actually steer through the water column. Okie doke. So one of the things I want to show you is very interesting how sea turtles evolved. This is a very small carapace from a hawksbill turtle, but you can see that what happened through evolution, instead of our ribs that kind of curl around and cover and protect our lungs and our heart, the turtle's ribs, you can see the backbone right here, And then these are the ribs that have kind of straightened, they're kind of bent a little bit, but they straighten out, forming this carapace. And you can almost see light passing through here, but this is keratin here that builds it up. And then this shell is what's protecting them. And all of these scales, big scales, they call scutes. But this is kind of fascinating to see that the turtles are actually have a backbone, and they're their ribs, but their ribs are actually the structure for forming the shell, the carapace. Okay, so anyways, we did talk a few sensory things. I'm going to use the Hawksbill because it's a little smaller again. Turtles have large eyes, so they are well adapted in seeing in dark environments. And we already mentioned the nose right there, and the tip is, you can see the two holes there, that's the nose. They have a keen sense of smell, and what's very interesting is that turtles, we're going to be talking more about migration and navigation, but I'm going to tell you that when they get close to the nesting ground, where they were born, 20 years later, by instinct, they're imprinted on going back to the same place where they were born. And they think they do that by the geomagnetic fields that our Earth gives off. And I talked to you before about magnetite, okay? So, so magnetite is something we'll talk about some more. But right in this area here, in the leading edges of their flippers, we have detected magnetite, and right here, and they're kind of feeling as they're swimming through the water column, the magnetic fields. Okay, so let me just show you what magnetite looks like. This has got some sand in it, but you can see that it's an iron material, and we even have some on this magnet here. You can see how that is on the magnet. But this is what's in our bodies too. But this is a kind of what they call a ferrous oxide. It's an iron material, and it's what happens is it's attracted to magnets, but it can actually turn into a magnet. So these turtles basically have that internal compass in them to navigate, and that's really helpful. The big eyes might help with stars navigating. We'll talk more about that, but they think it's primarily the magnetite. Okie doke, so I think that's it for this lesson. I'm going to stop this one and we're going to move on. Okay, we're back, and you've all learned about swimming turtles. You can do that with your hands. You just kind of go like that with your hands and put your thumbs out like you're swimming. That was kind of fun at Leatherback Sea Turtle Day up at Santa Cruz at the Sanctuary Exploration Center. Okay, so I think that's it. Our next lesson will be on sea turtle mating, nesting, and life cycle. And that is what we coming up next.